Hi, let me first demonstrate you my practice and then I'll explain you some details and why I consider this way of soldering two wires together the best way. Okay, to begin with, I use this kind of soldering iron. It's a very cheap, about €7. It's a very cheap and decent tool. Uh, the power of this soldering iron is 40 watts, but it has two options, 30 and 130 watts. It's 130 watts when you press the trigger in. Okay, for usual wires, I never use the trigger. It's not. It's unnecessary. I use it only for thicker wires that demand more heat so that the tin melts easily and effectively over them. Aimless or continuous usage of the trigger harms the resistor of the gun in the long term, and so it won't last for long. The same happens if you forget the soldering gun switched on overnight or for many hours. What is important about the tip of the soldering gun is, first, before soldering you wait for the tip to get heated sufficiently. Second, if it's a cone-shaped tip like the one I use, you don't use the edge of the tip but the part between the yellow arrows. And third, you wipe the tip of the soldering iron every time before and after soldering so as to be always clean and shiny. I forgot to say that the sponge must be wet with water, so a nice trick is to take a bottle of water and with a nail drill a hole on the cap so you have always ready some water on your bench. And something last before start soldering. If the tip of the gun looks like corroded, not shiny, and when you melt tin on it, it doesn't stay on the tip but falls down on the bench, Then you have to rub it with a sandpaper slightly or scratch it a little with a cutting blade, then wipe it on the sponge and try again. Repeat this process until the tip looks nice and the tin stays on it. Last, I never use flax as other people advise because all tins in the market have embedded flax in them. So I use flax only when soldering or desoldering SMD devices. To strip a cable, I prefer making 2 or 3 cuts around the insulating tube of the cable. I never use wire stripper or other tools. I use only wire cutter, and that because only this way I'm sure that the thin tiny wires inside the cable will remain untouched. There are many cases the cables you want to solder are very short, for example if it comes out from a wall or in a car, and there is no margin at all to cut and try again if first time stripping fails. To make a perfect joint requires that before you solder the 2 wires together, each one of them must be perfectly tinned. So first you melt the tin over them at each one separately, checking that the tin stays clear, shiny, and it goes all the way around the wire. To tin each wire, I hold the wire with the first and the second fingers, and the tin with the third and the fourth ones. Whereas to solder the 2 wires together, I hold one wire with the first and the fourth finger, and the other wire with the second and the third. Following, place the 2 wires side by side, put a small ball of tin on the tip of the soldering gun, and with a smooth dragging movement, solder the 2 wires. Inspect visually the area of the joint. If the tin is melted all over around the 2 wires so that you can't distinguish each one separately, then the joint is perfect. At the end, warm the stirring tube with a lighter or a heat gun to embrace firmly the point of joint, or otherwise use some insulating tape. The reason I use only this practice and not other easier ways, for example by twisting first the 2 wires together and then soldering them, is because that sometimes, especially when the wires are old, their copper isn't clean and shiny, and so the tin isn't properly melted on them. So you may think that they are well soldered, but in fact what you've done is what we call in electronics a dry joint. It's a joint that permanently works, but in the future it may cause a malfunction very difficult to diagnose. If you meet an old cable like that, before you tin it, separate a little the tiny wires apart, and with a knife or a cutting blade scratch them so that the copper looks clear and shiny. Finally, as about my single-hand practice, okay, it's more difficult at the beginning as you don't use wire holders and alligator clips, but with some practice then it becomes easy. And this is a great advantage if you imagine yourself being on a ladder or on a roof or in a car trying to solder 2 wires together. Thanks for watching, and if you found my video helpful, click like or leave your comment.